So if we claim to know God and yet we don't want anything to do with God's people, we're liars. It's not really my message that I'm communicating here. The scriptures say this. In 1 John chapter number 1, the author, John, the apostle, says, among other things, that his desire is for them to have fellowship with him, and that their fellowship is with God. And then he says in verse 6 that if we claim to know God and yet we walk in darkness, then we lie and do not the truth. But in verse 7 he says, if we will walk in light as he is in the light, then we will have fellowship one with another. And I believe that's when he goes on to say, and the blood of Jesus Christ, his son, cleanses us from all sins. So the person that is walking in fellowship with God and the fullness of the reality of the forgiveness of sins is going to desire fellowship with other believers. Jesus desires for us to abide in him, but also to abide with one another. We're many members of one body. 1 Corinthians communicates that. The book of Hebrews says, let brotherly love continue. Peter, I think in 2 Peter, says that we ought to love the brotherhood. 1 Corinthians, Paul famously says that, if he has all the spiritual gifts and lacks love, lacks charity, then he is nothing. So we need to have brotherly love. 1 John goes on to communicate this in some verses that I scoffed at when I was a kid, because they were always quoted only whenever we were bickering. I'm the youngest of 4 boys. Anyway, but beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone that loveth knoweth God, or is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. My mom would also, Chevelle. My mom would also say, and be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake has forgiven you. And then she would quote the book of Psalms and say, behold how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And keeping the peace between us 4 boys was difficult, even though we didn't really fight all that much. I look at other families and the way they grew up, and I'm like, is that normal? Anyway, my mom really, really wanted us to have peace in the home. And God really, really wants us to have peace in the church. Let love be without dissimulation. Philippians tells us. So they're all throughout the New Testament. You see clearly presented that if we love God, we will love God's people. Jesus even said, my brothers and sisters are they that do the will of God. And so, yeah, I understand there's no perfect church. So much corruption in instituted religious systems. I get that, but their disobedience is no excuse for our disobedience. Love the Lord, love his people, walk in light.